turn to Jussi. I haven't introduced him yet, although he's spoken a couple of times. Jussi is from Finland. There he's a linguist specializing in Slavic languages, researcher until in 2008 he was voted into municipal council in Helsinki, and in 2014 he became a member of the European Parliament. And I'm very happy that he's here with us today, and now he has the honor of concluding this event.
Thank you, Mr. Kelmo, ladies and gentlemen. It has been a great pleasure to co-host this event. Being the last speaker, I wish to thank warmly the other hosts, the speakers, the panelists, and the audience for their contributions. I would like to say a few words about lobbying and gun control. The Commission, as well as many anti-gun politicians, and also the media, which as a rule is against private ownership of firearms, have complained on many occasions about an aggressive gun lobby. Many ordinary citizens, sport shooters, hunters, gun collectors, have learned to their surprise that they are part of an aggressive lobby, working for the interest of the gun industry, hostile to security and gun control. When people are attacked for reasons that they cannot understand, or for reasons that seem unjust and false, they become angry and defensive. By comparison, what do you think would happen if the Commission or some politicians suddenly proposed banning dogs? The reasoning would be that dogs are pretty dangerous. There are many instances where dogs have hurt people. Dogs make noise and are scary, and after all, very few people actually need a dog. It is my guess that we would get a lot of alarmed, angry dog owners. Some of them would probably send the Commission and the politicians unfriendly email. We would have an aggressive dog lobby. These are the very arguments that gun owners always hear when somebody wants to take their guns away. Guns are dangerous, guns are scary, people are hurt with guns, nobody really needs a gun. Some politicians are fanatically against firearms, but most of them are just indifferent and ignorant. The topic does not touch them personally. It is easy to ban something that you personally do not need. It is easy to think that if I do not need something, then nobody needs it, or at least nobody should need it. Many politicians are also genuinely concerned about security. They may feel that doing anything is better than doing nothing. I actually heard this exact phrase from a Finnish politician some years ago when certain new restrictions were introduced in our own national gun law. I quote, "I know this will not solve the problem, but the important thing is that we do something. We must send a signal to the citizens." End of quote. We should look at this issue from the point of view of those whom it concerns. Since the legislation in question mostly affects sport shooters and gun collectors, I will talk about their point of view. Just like in any other sport, a typical sport shooter spends most of their time and money on the sport. The equipment, accessories, trips to the shooting events, competition fees, and so on. But it is not just about equipment and money. Very often, the shooting community is their social network, the people they know. When you take away their weapons, you take away much more than the weapons. And this is one of the reasons why people are so upset and angry about the Commission proposal. I know from personal experience that nobody is as interested in gun safety and good gun control than gun owners themselves. Why? Because they know that every time something bad happens, Every time a criminal shoots somebody with a stolen firearm, every time a jihadist shoots people with a smuggled assault rifle, the media and populist politicians will attack the legitimate gun owner. I am sure the vast majority of European sport shooters support effective gun control to ensure that criminals and terrorists do not get firearms. But gun control, like any other restrictive legislation, must be targeted, proportionate and fair. There have been certain loopholes in the EU and national gun laws which the Commission proposal rightly addresses. Let us take, for example, the deactivation standards. It has been shown that large numbers of deactivated firearms have been purchased legally, reactivated and then sold to terrorists and criminals. Some of them were used in last year's attacks. It is clear, in my opinion, that if firearms are subject to licensing, then there should be no way you can acquire them without an authorization. Unfortunately, some other parts of the Commission proposal are not targeted, proportionate or fair. The most striking example is the proposed ban on semi-automatic sporting rifles. In support of this proposal, the Commission has produced fantastical or even fabricated crime figures and claimed, among other things, that such firearms were used in last year's terrorist attacks. They were not, period. If you believe what the Commission says, more people are killed with legal semi-automatic rifles than the overall number of homicides in the European Union. The ban of semi-automatic rifles was a late addition to the Commission proposal. Referring to the experiences of Mr. Petroni, the staff of Commission Vice President Jyrki Katainen told me 3 days before the Paris attacks last November that this proposal will not be in the Commission proposal. It made its appearance right after the Paris attack. It is very regrettable that the Commission tries cynically to make use of the general panic to push forward what is essentially a political and ideological project. To make it short, it is essential for the credibility and the legitimacy of the European Union that all restrictive laws are well grounded and that they target an identified problem, especially if those laws affect existing legally held private property. Semi-automatic rifles are not an identified problem, and therefore there is no reason to introduce further restrictions on them. No impact assessment was conducted because it would have yielded politically wrong results. The studies to which the Commission refers in its proposal do not mention semi-automatic rifles. There are many other details in the Commission proposal and unfortunately also in the European Parliament and the Council positions that have been and should be criticised. For example, the debate whether the maximum magazine capacity for semi-automatic firearms should be 10 or 20 rounds of ammunition or some other number. What does this have to do with anything? Firstly, it takes a competent shooter maybe a second to change a new magazine. Secondly, criminals do not care about magazine restrictions. Thirdly, there is an endless number of legally purchased high-capacity magazines already in private hands. Magazine restrictions would complicate matters for law-abiding citizens. It would damage small businesses, but it would not prevent one single crime anywhere. Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Julian King from the Commission said recently in the Committee on Home Affairs that 1 year has passed since the Paris attacks and that it is getting more and more difficult to explain to the public why it takes so long for the European Union to adopt the new directive. I will tell you why it takes so long. If the Commission had presented a reasonable proposal respecting the principles of good lawmaking, both in the content of the directive and in the procedure, we would already have a new firearms directive. It has taken so long because the proposal goes way too far and in the wrong direction. Fortunately, the Parliament and the Council were not asleep. Fortunately, the civil society, ordinary citizens, the so-called gun lobby, stood up to defend their rights and property. I want to thank again all the participants, and I wish the rapporteur, Mrs. Ford, strength, wisdom and good luck in the trilogues. Thank you very much.